Coming up on the Health Feast.
When did you get it first time?
It was the end of June of 2020. So I catch it and I'm immediately in I'm scared, but at the same time, what really got me was just seeing on the news where there was the families were like FaceTiming their family members like goodbye in their last days. And I was thinking to myself, man, there's no way that I'm going to die in a hospital. To me, it's like, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die at home. So I remember having a conversation with the nurse, because at that time they didn't want you to come in unless you were like really not being able to breathe. And I remember thinking like, oh, if I go in, then you're going to die. So I remember I was having some shortness of breath, but I wasn't sure if it was just being out of shape or so I would call. I remember on the phone with the nurse practitioner, and I was explaining to her well, I can breathe, but sometimes, I feel like I'm out of breath. And I remember thinking, I don't want her to tell me, hey, I want you to come in. Because I knew based on what I was seeing on the news was like, if you go into the hospital, the chances of you dying were a lot higher. So in my mind, I'm thinking, if I can convince her not to tell her to come in, at least if I'm going to pass, I'll pass at home.
Hi, Poe.
Good morning. How you doing,
Good
Rock?
morning. I'm good. I'm getting there. I had COVID last week, so talk about that. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the Health Feast. As we said last week, our last episode, the Health Feast is a mindset on how you live a life that's not only good for you, but also feels good.
Right.
Yeah. So welcome back, everyone. And welcome back, Poe. Poe, how you doing?
Doing good. Looking forward to our conversation today. I wanted to ask you to tell me a little bit more about your COVID experience.
Yeah, why don't we talk about that? Why don't we talk about COVID? And I want to hear about your experience. You've had COVID before, right?
Yes, twice.
Twice. Okay. When did you get it first time?
April. I'm sorry. It was July.
July.
It was the end of June. It was the end of June of 2020.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
A few months in. And what was that? Okay. That was before we had vaccines and therapeutics. You're someone I'd worry might get a little more sick from it. I don't know. Because of your weight?
Right.
What was your experience like?
It was actually probably the scariest I've ever been. Not for myself, but for my kids. I think we were called essential workers back then. That was the term that was really popular. They were coining all of us that were going to work during that time as essential. So I got it from my place of work, and it was scary because every day we would go in, we would come home and watch, turn on the news just because we wanted to find out information about it. We didn't really know anything about it.
That's right.
And all we saw were clips from China of them bringing bodies out of, houses. And the funny thing is, what I remember was I think it was March 15th or 16th is when I think the governor announced the whole completely lockdown. And I remember going to work and at first they were told to put on masks. And then a few days, I can't remember, a few days or even weeks, it was I remember coming in, we have our masks on now. And then the nurse that was taking our temperature all of a sudden had face covering. And then it as every day went on, before you know it, it was like a full on TVAC suit. And we were like, what is going on? While we were just walking up with just these cloth masks on. So it was scary because I would come home and my wife, she works in the hospital too. She's a lab tech, and both had to work. We had 4 kids that were we weren't even sure what the age was where they could be home alone. That was another thing that was running through our mind. It's we were Googling, how old can a teenager be at home by themselves while we go to work? Fortunately, we had some relatives pretty much take our little one, and she just took her for weeks on end
Hmm.
so that we can go back and forth to work. And, because I wasn't going to have, I think my daughter was at the time 11 or 12, my oldest.
Hmm.
So, but it was scary because, you get on the freeway and it was like nothing. Like there
Yeah.
was nobody on the road. And I was
Right.
like, what? This is weird. It was like something out of like a movie.
Yeah.
Uh, and then, so I catch it and I'm immediately in like, I'm scared, but like, at the same time, what really got me was just seeing on the news where there was like the families were like FaceTiming their family members like goodbye in their last days. And I was
Hmm.
thinking to myself, man, there's no way that I'm going to die in a hospital. To me, it's like, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die at home. So that was like, just to kind of give you a picture of what type of fear, because I knew like people were dying, but I was like, man, what a terrible way to go. Like you can't even have
Yeah.
anybody around.
Yeah.
So when I caught it, I it did affect my breathing. I think mine lasted like, I was out from work for like 30 days, but it
Oh,
was
wow.
because like, yeah, the first few days it was like weak, headache. Um, I remember having a conversation with the nurse because at that time they didn't want you to come in unless you were like really not being able to breathe. And I remember thinking like, oh, if I go in, then you're gonna die. So I remember like I was having some like
Oh.
shortness of breath, but I wasn't sure if it was just being out of shape or so I would call. I remember on the phone with the nurse practitioner, and I was explaining to her like, well, I can breathe, but sometimes I feel like I'm out of breath. And I remember thinking, I don't want her to tell me, hey, I want you to come in, because I knew from based on what I was seeing on the news was like, if you go into the hospital, the chances of you dying were a lot higher. So in my
Hmm.
mind, I'm thinking, if I can convince her not to tell me her to come in, at least if I'm going to pass, I'll pass at home, and at least I'll be with my family versus going to the hospital and then end up passing there and saying goodbye to my family via FaceTime. That was something that in my mind that was not going to happen. Like I was already set. And just to note, like I, one of my fellow coworkers who he ended up, we worked the same night together. We both had to work at a COVID unit at St. Francis Hospital, because that's where there was a lot of our clientele that were staying in the hospital. So we were there. It was a COVID unit, and it was just weird because all of us were standing. There was a bunch of us that are coworkers that were sitting in this hallway, and all we had was like masks on. And then like the people that were going inside, the nurses and the doctors, they all had the TVAC suits on. So it was just kind of looking around like, man, this is crazy. How are we not going to catch? So anyways, we ended up catching it, and one of my coworkers ended up passing away.
Hmm.
And so it was really, I don't know. It's definitely going to go down as probably one of the most memorable times of my life. In my lifetime, it was just the weirdest thing. So
Hmm.
that was the first time I caught it. So I happened to make it. I never went to the hospital. I think the fever started going down. They prescribed. I isolated myself, but it was weird because like it's so difficult to isolate when you think about it. When you have a family,
Hmm.
you have, you prior to me even coming up positive, like I was sitting there hugging my daughter, hugging my kids. So my wife's attitude was like, if you have it, we already have it, because we didn't know you didn't have it. So it's like now all of a sudden you have it. It's like, how are you expecting, families to just like split up? So I know towards the end of the isolation, because I was like, I just didn't want them to catch it, So I was really telling my wife and kids, like, if you guys can stay out of the house. But my wife's attitude was like, no, if you have it, we already have it too. So, but that to go back to that mindset back then, man, it was totally different,
Hmm.
like compared to now. Um, but
Well,
yeah, that was my experience.
Poe, that it sounds like you were deeply affected that first time. I mean, but your health was impacted quite remarkably. Like you were getting really short of breath, and I do wonder, like maybe you did need to go to the hospital. You said something really interesting. You said I had this thought: if I go to the hospital, I'm going to die. And wow, that I don't. First of all, I don't think that necessarily would have been true.
Right.
Somebody needs to go to the hospital, and we should
gotta
say,
go to the hospital. Totally.
everyone listening, right? Like Poe and I are talking about COVID. We're going to talk about I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience. We're going to talk about like treatments maybe and therapeutics and things that might come up as we talk. This is all obviously our conversation, educational experience. If you have experienced COVID or will, or or sick or have had it in the past, we don't, this is our experience, and we of course everything that you do for yourself would be a conversation you have with a healthcare provider or with your primary doctor. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't advise anybody to not go to the doctors.
Yeah.
That was my choice.
Poe is like, if you go to the hospital, you're gonna die. So don't go to the hospital. That's not actually what happens in. I mean, people die in hospitals, but not be.
Yeah, no. Well, but that the reason why it's funny, but at that time, I mean, that was what was going on.
I know what you mean. You felt like if you were sick enough to go to the hospital, that was a really bad sign. So in a way, you didn't want to be sick enough to go to the hospital, even though in your description, you may have been sick enough. But that's really interesting. I want to bring that up again later. Okay. The other thing I heard is you lost a colleague and a friend or that same time from the same exposure. And that was really sad. It continues probably, I'm sure, to be really sad. And that speaks to the kind of tremendous impact that this has had, the pandemic has had in so many facets of our life, but the human loss, the toll. And I too, when I was working in the hospital, had some patients die or was involved in their care or before they went to the ICU. And then they never made it out of the ICU. And, to your point, they were dying alone. They were alone in a room. And at some point, like in a couple months in, we set up cameras in the room so we could observe them from the nurses' station. So nurses were going in even less because every time they went in, they had to wear one of those hazmat suits, like a gown and gloves and everything. And supplies were low. That was very stressful at my work, was that, there was a period where we didn't have gowns. In fact, my colleague and I bought raincoats.
Wow.
We bought, I mean, everyone was doing things like this, and they were the government didn't have supplies. They were sending, limited supplies that they had, and it just things weren't available, and people were figuring out ways to get. I was actually very fortunate. My organization very quickly was able to secure supplies, and the medical group and the hospital I was working at. So we didn't really have an issue, but we were worried about it. And there was probably a small period where those things were, everyone was doing this. We were reusing masks. I had them clipboard on my cubby where I worked, or I had my workstation. There were thumbtacks, and then I had masks hung up, and then we were sort of like, after a certain number of days, they're probably clean again. We don't know. The virus has died or whatever. So, because it was a limited resource for a while. And then, and then I also heard that it had an impact on you isolating at home. It was hard to do that. We had a very similar experience I'll talk about. But after 30 days, like, how long did it take to recover from that initial infection?
I would say about 20 days.
Okay.
I mean, that's the only thing, because I knew I was out for a considerable amount of time. The fever was around for me for a while. I don't know, maybe I don't know how many days it was. It's been quite some time, but I mean, a total of when I felt like completely 100% was about 20 days, I think. Maybe, yeah.
Okay, and then you got it again.
Yeah, and that was last summer, and that one wasn't as severe.
Was that the Delta wave? or
I would
Omicron?
say so. Yeah,
I
that's
don't
right. That's around
remember.
that time. Yeah, I was
Oh,
like, and
okay.
that one was like a flu. Runny nose, was no fever. I think I had a little bit of a cough, but
No, we were definitely this past summer, just now in 2022.
yes,
Oh yeah, that we were in
or
Omicron.
2021. Yeah, 2022. Yeah, it was this past summer,
Okay.
and that one wasn't as bad. Like it didn't affect my breathing that
Well,
much.
you
This
had been
one,
vaccinated in the interim, right?
vaccinated, yes, and I was a lot. I think I was also full plant based at that time, so I was,
Ah,
feeling good. I was exercising. Like, yeah, it would be an argument that I was optimal health at that time because I was just,
ah.
active. I
It's
was
good. I wanted
eating
to
a lot
bring this
better.
up. I wanted to bring this
Yeah,
up because when
I
the
attribute
pandemic
that too.
when the pandemic started, I was working in the hospital. I was working in like we had a COVID ward. Although they and like I said, we were masking and gowning, but then sometimes early on, their supplies weren't great. And I asked myself very early on. I was like, and I was scared. There were so many things we didn't know. And my wife, thankfully, was able to work remotely, and my kids were home. So she was home with all my kids. The four of them were just home every day. And I was going to the hospital, and I wasn't working every day. So some days I was home, but like I would I would undress in the garage because we didn't know. I would like
Yeah,
undress in the garage and go jump in the shower. And for a while I was sleeping like down like in a different room,
yeah,
um,
same here.
because because you're just like, oh, are you going to expose us when you come back from the hospital? But then we quickly stopped that. My whole mood and mindset got really down from all that though. Like, and I was reading the news a lot, every second, and I started getting back on like social media, and my like all my co-residents from training formed this like WhatsApp group. But the thing is, everyone was just sharing like things that were like, yeah, new information, but it was another reason to kind of get anxious. Like we early on, we were sharing what was happening in Italy and what was happening in other countries, and we were seeing like all these kind of hospitals fill up, and we didn't
Images,
know.
right?
Yeah, and we didn't know what was going to happen, and there was a lot of fear, I think rightfully so. But I don't know, one day my daughter, this like spare room I was in, she puts a note under the door, and she basically said something like, uh, can you please stop reading the news and spend time with the family?
Hmm.
And then my kids made a list of what they called COVID positives. I was home. I had to go work. Oh, I had to go work in the hospital overnight, and I was working some nights, every month, and I was just feeling anxious about having to go back, and I was feeling anxious about leaving them. And when I got there, they sent me like a screenshot of a picture they had taken. They called them COVID positives, and it was all the good things that we were experiencing as a result of the pandemic. And it was like more outside time. They got to see me all day before my night shift. Normally I wouldn't see them because it's a 16-hour shift. So I wouldn't see them. I would see them in the morning before school, and then I wouldn't see them for like, because I'd be sleeping then when I came back, and I wouldn't see them till after school. I'd go like a day and a half without seeing them. And so, but we had lunch together that day, or we had like an early dinner or something. Then they were reminding me like, oh, this is a mindset. Like it's not only a mindset. Like you can get sick, and but that it all starts here, right? It starts with your thoughts. In that time, it was hard for me, like initially, to acknowledge that, but then much like, you know you go through ups and downs, and I went through a very down time where my depression was kind of bad, um and I felt like I was not in the best place, but then kind of emerged out of that through talking with people, through some couples therapy, through connecting with like some of my close friends. It's interesting, when I was going through that down, I kind of cut myself off. But connection is one of those things that actually helps pull you out. And it was one of my really good friends who called me out on it. He called me out on it, but he also didn't know what was going on in my life or in my head. He said, you seem so withdrawn during this pandemic. Like he's like, I've spent more time connecting with other people, and you're like my best friend, and I like hardly hear from you. And then that was a good kind of wake up call for me. And anyway, that's an aside kind of, but that was my experience early in the pandemic. And I didn't get the infection. In fact, I made it all the way to December of 2021, and was it 20? Yeah, and got vaccinated. And we thought, and I was one of the early people to get vaccinated because I was working in the hospital. And we thought, and you probably got vaccinated pretty early too, I'm guessing. Yeah, essential workers. And I thought, oh, I sighed a sigh of relief, right? That I was like, oh, I made it. Like, it's over now.
Yeah.
It's over now. But of course we know, like, in the last 2 years, like, there's been lots of ups and downs, and now it's sort of become a regular part of our life. Yeah.
Now, what you were talking about, how you kind of were disconnected. I felt like that whole, I don't know how many months that was like a blur, because it was literally like a zombie. You get up in the morning, you got to go to work, and then you start seeing about, like all my other relatives and family were off from work, and you're like, you're on the, you're like on the go. So I totally,
that's right,
understand that. My wife and I, and that's the other thing, was like both my wife and I.
Yeah,
work,
both your wife and I were working. Yeah,
we're working. So it wasn't like we had that opportunity. Like one of us stayed home and the other one was at work. That's when, and then my wife actually got called in at some point. Yeah, to work in. She's not a hospitalist, but hospital started getting so busy and full that she did some weeks of hospitalist work. Because she's a kidney specialist, and she mostly does research, but she does some clinic. But there was a need for more people to do the work. The hospitals were starting to get more full. That was a scary time. We didn't have our will in place until then. And then we got our will done, and it was like, we have 3 kids. We have 3 small kids, and we didn't have any of that work done, but that was an impetus for us to do that. So it's funny because you said you didn't catch it during the initial stages of the pandemic, and it's funny because there's also officers that I work with that have never got it, never up until now. But
yeah, there's some people who haven't. I mean, at least as far as we know, like they think they haven't gotten it. And
well, it's funny because some of them say they got really sick before March, like in February, they were really sick.
I did.
See, that's the other thing.
I got really sick in February, but we don't know. Anyway, that's all.
Yeah,
that's all conjecture and hearsay. But,
right. So now you caught it. Tell me about.
Oh yeah, so now I caught it. I mean, this now, almost 3 years in, I've had, my primary vaccination and booster, and I didn't get the most recent booster, which I can talk about. I mean, I think in retrospect, I probably would have. It just kind of didn't occur to me. That's, I think, what's happened. I've gone so long now, and it's not, I haven't been a hermit. Like I don't go out a ton, but I do sometimes go out, like to restaurants or, that kind of thing. I've been to a few concerts in the last year or two. Right. Nothing. And I'm not masking at all of them, although I still kind of, I mean, even more recently, I was going to the grocery store without a mask. So not that I thought I wasn't going to get it. It's just, I was actually surprised, maybe a little surprised I hadn't get it. I tell you, early on in the pandemic, though, you mentioned plant-based eating and how you thought that was helpful. We know that, first of all, now there's good research that's come out that shows eating more plants is protective of getting COVID and getting more severe COVID. So there was a study, this came out in December of 2021, and this was 2,884 frontline healthcare workers from 6 countries: France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the UK, and the United States. And they found that if the healthcare workers that were following a plant-based diet or a pescatarian diet, so a plant-based diet where they also ate fish, that were basically higher in vegetables, in beans and lentils and nuts, and lower in chicken and red and processed meat, the kind of purely plant-based diet group had a 73% lower odds of getting moderate to severe COVID. And the pescatarian group had almost 60% lower odds of getting moderate to severe COVID. And, they theorize, and other people have said, is probably because the more plants you eat, when you're eating such a high percentage of plant-based diet, you have healthier gut bacteria, which basically support your immune response. And those healthy gut bacteria produce all sorts of compounds in the response to basically fiber and other nutrients in plants, things that we can't digest. It goes down to the colon, and then they produce compounds or hormones, things that are anti-inflammatory. There's short chain fatty acids, for example, that go into our bloodstream, and they do things like regulate our blood sugar and lower inflammation and regulate our mood. We produce a lot of serotonin in the gut. So anyway, early on, I already knew these, not all that, but I knew that eating plants was supportive of your immune system. So I kind of doubled down on that. I had gone from like eating mostly plant-based diet, or like 80% plant-based diet, to I was like, I'm just going to eat this way now. Plus, like, that was the stuff we could get. Like, I got a big bag of lentils on Amazon. It was really hard to get, and beans were hard to come by. And now, 3 years in, my son picks it up at school. So on last Saturday was like Saturday before was my wife's birthday, she's 40th birthday. And no one was sick that day. I made this wonderful whole food plant-based, I would call it a health feast. In fact, like that's what it was. Everything was, I made a really awesome salad with roasted sweet potatoes, and it had pomegranate seeds in it and this tahini dressing. And I made a butternut squash soup, and I made, that had like this pesto swirled in. And this cake that we always have for every birthday in my family is a thin mint cookie cake. And it's a whole food plant-based cake. The cake itself has like dark cocoa powder, but it's sweetened with dates. And the flour is like oat flour and almond flour. And the frosting has peppermint oil in it, but it's like cashews and cocoa powder and dates. So it's completely whole, but it's super moist and fudgy and delicious. And it tastes like the kind of Girl Scout cookie thin mint, because it's like this dark chocolate. And so anyway, we had all that. And then Sunday, my son wakes up and he's having like high fever and sore throat. And I did a COVID test, because anytime someone's been getting sick, right, in the last year or two, since we've had those at-home tests, we check them for COVID. And I'm almost at this point, I'm like, yeah, I check it, and it usually just comes back negative. It turned positive right away. Like in a second, it turned positive. And I was like, oh, is this real? Are we doing this? And so
How was that? Like, oh my gosh, COVID has now reached my family.
Well, yeah, because I didn't think I would never get it. But then I also, I think I was like, oh, maybe you won't get it. Like, maybe you have some. Well, and at that point, I didn't have it yet. So I thought, okay, maybe I won't get it. So I was like, Rohan, my son, go wear a mask and go in your room. And I closed the door. I gave him some Tylenol, and they were going in his room with a mask. And then I think I called you like that day just to chat. It was a Sunday. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then I look up, and he's like walking in the hall without a mask, just sort of aimlessly wandering. And I'm like, Rohan, what are you doing? And then my daughter said, we've already all been exposed. Just like your wife was saying.
Yeah.
My daughter said, we've already all been exposed. Like, he must have had it,
Right.
And then my wife said that too. She said, we all just want to be together.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, in this moment, I have a choice. But I had already been around him like a ton, that morning, that night before. So So I said, okay, we're just gonna. And then he had fevers for a couple of days. All my kids ended up getting it in succession. Then my daughter got it the next day. Then my youngest one got it the next day. I got it. Well, I don't know. The first like Monday and Tuesday, we did our podcast on Monday,
Yeah,
and I was telling you
yeah,
my son has COVID. I felt fine, maybe a little achy, and then Tuesday also just a little achy and tired, and I was like, oh, maybe this is the extent of it. Not bad.
yeah.
Like I can deal with this. And then, and I was giving myself a pat on the back. I'm like, oh, you healthy diet, you exercise, like good for you. And then the next day is when it hit me. It felt like a bad flu. Like by Wednesday night, I was like kind of rigering and shaking and had chills and
Oh
I
wow.
was taking, yeah, I took ibuprofen and then it kind of went down. But then Thursday, I really didn't feel. I just felt like I didn't want to get out of bed. And starting Friday, I started getting a little bit better. I've been getting a little bit better every day. I would say I'm like 80%. And I've been intentional about doing some things since I got the initial infection. My uh what did I say? My fear is like, oh, it would take me a long time to get better. It certainly didn't feel good. Or long COVID, like being a long hauler. Actually, I have a friend who's dealing with that for months now. And I certainly have taken care of patients who have dealt with long COVID, and I helped some of my patients. I helped some of my patients. I would say that I've seen some of my patients overcome it. Now, it may have just been time, because we know with time, like most people are recovering from long COVID. But what do you know about long COVID, Poe?
I've only heard about it. I can't say that that I've actually. I'm trying to think if I know anybody that's actually had it. I have a friend who has asthma,
Uh huh.
and she says that she still has effects of it, the coughing, but I don't know too much about it.
Okay.
Like,
Well, it's that's the thing. It's not very well defined. I mean, it is now. Um, there are so many different symptoms that people can get from COVID, and also what we call these non-acute sequelae of COVID, or just this long-term sequelae of COVID, basically. And it can be anything from like just being really tired all day, so having this kind of chronic fatigue. In fact, there is a syndrome called chronic fatigue syndrome, and there's a lot of overlap between some of the symptoms that many people have been having with long COVID and symptoms that people have with chronic fatigue. The respiratory symptoms that can be a whole piece, right, that just prolongs. Like you said, if somebody has underlying lung disease, asthma, emphysema, they can have cough that goes on for months. They can have shortness of breath that persists, or just the endurance, like, can be really low for people. Yeah, I've seen one individual I took care of who had just really, really poor endurance, like just felt tired, like was sleeping like 14, 16 hours, and the littlest things. So on Friday, I remember like cleaning up the kitchen. I think last time I got sick, I told you this. Like when you get sick, you still have to do those things, even when your whole family
yeah,
is sick, especially
yeah,
when your whole family is sick. And my wife, I started feeling a little bit better on Friday. She started feeling it on Friday. She didn't test positive all week until
oh
Friday.
wow,
I don't know how, because my kids were like, I didn't get the GI symptoms, but my kids were
yeah,
vomiting, and she was dealing with that because I was just not feeling good on Wednesday and Thursday. And anyway, she starts getting sick on Friday, so I'm like, okay, I gotta take over now, make all the meals. My kids were home from school; I couldn't go to school, obviously, and clean the kitchen. And on her worst day on Friday, I would say, when she was having like rigors, and she went upstairs, and then for about an hour, and then she came back down, and she said, I'm feeling a little better. I think she took like a pain reliever or something. But she said, she did a meditation or she meditated, I guess, where she decided she was just going to, rather than like feeling how miserable she was feeling. She was just going to feel how she was feeling and like accept it for what it was and experience what it felt like. And she said in doing so, it softened the whole experience. It made the whole experience feel not as intense, not as severe. And she said, what I realized is that I like often, and in that moment when I'm sick, I'm like resisting how I'm feeling. There's a strong resistance of how I'm feeling. It doesn't feel good. And so I don't want to feel that way. And that resistance actually makes the whole experience, the whole feeling worse. Yeah. And in letting go and just experiencing it, she said I don't feel as bad. I feel better. And she didn't look better. I was like, you need to get back. She was having fever still. And I think maybe she was a little delirious no, that was inspiring for me. Because on Friday, I cleaned the kitchen and I told my daughter, and I was like, I want to cry. And she's like, why? I was like, that was so hard for me. I feel exhausted. And normally on Friday nights, I go into the garage and lift weights and work out if I'm home. And I couldn't, that was like the last thing I could imagine doing, right? Cleaning the kitchen was hard for me. And then I started having these thoughts like, oh, is this how it starts? Like people get long COVID? Like I was recognizing that I was having these thoughts, mind you. I think that's where like regular meditation and having awareness comes in. Like I was having these thoughts and I was acknowledging, wow, those are like irrational thoughts, not necessarily rational thoughts.
I see what you're saying.
And I saw in the moment, I said, I could get really, and my wife's example, it really inspired me because I said, I could get really caught up in these thoughts. Yeah. And you know what? I could manifest that. I could definitely manifest feeling more tired and more lethargic and feeling worse. And I said, no, I'm getting better. I want to manifest that I'm getting better. And I asked myself, what can I do? And early in the pandemic, I had started doing Wim Hof breathing. Have we talked about Wim Hof on the show?
No.
Wim Hof. Wim Hof is the Iceman. Do you know who he is?
Oh, yes. Yes, I know who he is. I only seen a few videos on him. He's the guy that I think he lives, I'm not sure what country he lives in, but he does like ice bath. He's like,
yes,
jumps into like ice cold rivers. And I only know a little bit about him. Yeah.
His story is fascinating. Okay. He lives in the Netherlands, and his wife committed suicide when his 5 children were very young. And he went into like a very deep, dark place, depression, couldn't get out of his head. One of the things that really helped him was what he realized when he goes in the cold, and focuses on his breath, and he gets out of his head and into his body, into the experiences of his body, and his body adapts. And so he started kind of jumping in the cold water and doing breath work and getting more interested in breath work and Eastern traditions, to the point where then he developed sort of a method that he uses for himself, but that he's also now taught for quite some time. And it's this breathing method, forced inhalations and exhalations. And then also, which by the way, if any of our listeners are interested, I'll put some links. He has some free resources. He has this really good YouTube video, like it's an hour long, like almost like orientation that he did live. It's a follow along, which I think is a great place if you're interested to start. I still use that. Anyway. So and all these things he's able to do, he can sit in the ice for hours. He has run a marathon in the snow, just in his shorts, for example. He can do all these things, but then what they learned, they've studied him in university in the Netherlands. And one thing they did, which is kind of fascinating, is they injected him with the toxin of a bacteria. So not the bacteria, but the toxin of the bacteria. And what they able to show was that he cleared the toxin faster, and he had less inflammation in his body. Like he didn't mount the fever so clearing the infection more efficiently. and not experiencing kind of all the residual side effects of that infection. Not actually the infection, but the toxin that the infection would produce. So that way he's not actually getting exposed to the infection. And then they did that study in healthy volunteers, which when I told my wife about this, it was like 2 groups of 12 individuals, and they split them up into a group that learned his method of breathing and cold exposure, and then a group that kind of didn't learn that. And they compared when they injected them with this toxin from this bacteria, and they saw the same exact thing. They saw less inflammation and clearing of the toxin faster in the group that was doing his method.
Wow.
That is what Wim Hof, he uses all these fantastic terms where he says, you're changing the chemistry. You're changing the chemistry of your body through the breathing method, but you're also, what you feel is this sort of lightheadedness and this tingling in the body as you do it. And without getting into like the physiology or the chemistry behind it, what he likes to say is you're energizing the body. And that's true in a lot of Eastern traditions. Breath is not like the word chi or the word prana. It doesn't just mean breath. It also means energy or life force, that the two are inextricably linked, that your breath actually, it affects the chemistry in your body. In doing so, it affects all the chemical processes in your body and affects the overall energy state of your body too. And you can feel that as you do the breathing, like you sort of get this tingling throughout your body. And as you do multiple rounds and you hold your breath, and you can hold your breath, you'd be surprised after the exhale for 2.5, even 3 minutes, if you as you start to do this regularly. And it's not even you're not feeling like, oh, I really need to breathe. Actually, you get out of your head and you start to feel all these sensations in your body. And there's this idea that because of this study that it may boost your immune response or at least your defense mechanisms. And so I started doing it regularly at the start of the pandemic. I had done it on and off before that, but at the start of the pandemic, like for the first few months, I would do it every day. I would do a few rounds of breathing every day. And I started taking cold showers. And so much, I got so into it that's why I have an ice bath, I have a chest freezer in my backyard that we converted into like an ice bath. So it stays at a constant 45 degrees. And I think I've mentioned I do that sometimes, but I've gotten away from that practice. And I wondered just in this week, I was like, oh, if I had been more consistent with that practice, might not have gotten the infection or gotten as sick, or I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
I'm not blaming myself. But anyway, once I got it, Wim Hof tells you, once you get sick, he tells you to stop doing cold exposure because it's a stress on the body. I agree with that. It's quite a stress on the body. And right now your body's fighting an infection. So you don't want to add extra stress. Same thing's true with exercise. Like very mild exercise, if it doesn't exhaust you, for example, could be okay when you have COVID or when you have any infection. You have to listen to your body. But any strenuous exercise, that not only that puts you at risk for getting an infection. So for like the 12 to 24 hours after you do really vigorous exercise,
Really?
your immune response is less because you're dealing with the inflammation of the workout, So that's not to say don't do vigorous exercise, but just be mindful of that. And certainly I think if you're sick, it's a good idea to avoid vigorous exercise. So I didn't do any vigorous exercise all week. And I also did go for like 3 walks. And yesterday was the first day where I went for like a hike and I jogged a little bit too. And I was listening to my body, and I was just reflecting on that because in the past, when I looked at exercise as a chore and it was something I never did, I never would have done that. But I really like when I felt like I was able to, like, first of all, I really wanted to do it. One, because the weather's been nice this week after it had been raining so much, like it's been sunny. And there's something very healing about being in nature and being outside. And so because today I feel like 80-90% better. So, and it's, it's like from this day I was sickest to today is 5 days, which is a normal time course. But I feel like my energy's better. Like I just when on Friday when I was washing the dishes and I felt exhausted, I was like, no, that's not how it's gonna continue. I told myself that, and I told myself that every day. I said, I'm getting better. I'm getting better. And I went outside to do a little bit of walking, and just like yesterday I went and did a little bit of hiking, and I stopped and I did Wim Hof breathing on the top of this ridge near our home, which overlooks the Pacific. It was like beautiful. It was sunny. It was a little chilly. Yeah, I don't know. Those practices I think have really helped me. And then just having like that mindset has really helped me too. I mean, I'm still recovering, but I don't have any concern now that I'm going to get long COVID. And I'm thankful that I got COVID at a time when if I did get sicker, there's medication you can take, and I got vaccine, and we had vaccines. So like when you got it early on, I mean, there were so many reasons why that was a much more dangerous and scary time to get the infection. So I feel very fortunate I've gone this long and that I'm getting
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, I think that some of the practices that you mentioned are pretty good. Like I like how your wife was saying, if you just like be in the experience versus trying to resist it, I think that's a big deal. Because I was just thinking about how many times I've been in
Hmm.
pain or something and
Hmm.
thinking like, or even being sick. And I
Hmm.
think, I don't even know if I had long COVID because I was out for a while. And like I said, I had the body aches, I lost the smell.
Hmm.
Did you experience any of those symptoms, like the loss of
I don't,
smell or
yeah,
the taste
no,
or anything like that?
no, no. I don't think I'm
Yeah.
not sure because it's changed so much.
Yeah.
And it's like different person to person. But nowadays I feel this is reported at least that it's less common to do those things, like to
Mm.
cause the loss of taste or smell, because early on there were also a lot of asymptomatic cases, and I don't think that happens as much anymore now as
Mm.
far as we know. Like I think it has evolved to definitely cause a lot of upper respiratory symptoms. It was interesting in my children, it caused a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms too,
Mm.
but not in my
Wow.
wife and me. Like we didn't have any vomiting or nausea. Our appetite was fine. They stopped eating for a couple days and were like vomiting for a day. Oh, sorry. No,
No,
go ahead. You
no,
go
because I
ahead.
was gonna say like so like tying it back to you know a healthier lifestyle, right? Like when it comes to because I know the second time, like I said, it wasn't that bad at all. I can't remember what the symptoms that I had. All I know is that I think I had like a runny nose, and I remember taking the test and it came up positive. So I was like, but I didn't feel like it was the first time, and I think at that time I was definitely eating way more plants, and was working out daily or at least going for walks and
There you
um,
go.
but so I think you said that the statistic, and I was wondering about that. Like that would be something that would help a lot of people if they knew, that if they just all their medicine can be from plants.
Oh yeah. Well, not yeah. I mean,
Not everything, but for
not
the most part,
everything. I
right?
mean, if you're on medicines now, like there is a
Obviously, right.
there. Well, no, there is a potential. Poe, we call this deprescribing. This is actually something we do in my new company, my new medical group that I work for. Is we work with our patients to make lifestyle changes, and then we track and monitor the parameters that we care about: their lab tests, their blood pressure, their blood sugar, and when it is possible and safe, and also to make sure that we do it if necessary. Because if someone's on blood sugar medicine, for example, to lower their blood sugar for diabetes, and they make lifestyle changes, then somebody needs to be ideally monitoring their blood sugar and seeing if they need to come down or off of medication, because that's what lifestyle changes do. They treat the root cause, and so very often we see the parameters get better. But no, as to whether or not someone comes off medication completely, it depends on how long they've had a certain condition and the degree of lifestyle changes they make. But that's the type of thing you should work with your doctor if you're interested in doing that, or try to find a lifestyle medicine oriented doctor. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine maintains a directory. So that's something I can put a link to in the show notes. But what were you going to say, Poe?
No, that was it. I was just talking about,
Resisting.
Yeah,
Resisting
you're
in the
talking
midst of
about,
illness.
yeah.
Okay.
And you're saying that how your wife was explaining to you about how,
That's right.
when she was feeling a certain way, resisting the whole idea of being sick, instead of that, she started to just sort of accept it, and it kind of made the experience not as bad.
Yeah, and then I just kind of came back to there was a day, Friday, where I was like, I don't really care about being healthy. I mean, we ordered food. We ordered sandwiches. My son wanted a sandwich or something, and so granted it was vegan, but I ordered like some meatball sub on like some roll with all this random stuff. It had vegan cheese. I was like, I don't care. I ate that. I ate what did I eat? I ate Oreo cookies are vegan. I did that for a moment. I did that for a moment on Friday because I was feeling so bad, and I was like, you know what? I know that food makes me feel good, but then I didn't continue that for very long because I also recognized, I was like, if you keep eating that food, it is going to hamper you from getting better. So very quickly after kind of lunch on Friday, I pivoted back to just eating whole plant-based food. And, I made like smoothies over the weekend. I made a really good one. It was oranges, persimmons, and pears. My smoothie recipes are whatever we have on hand.
Nice.
I don't use a recipe at all. I'm like, okay, we have these 3 fruits or whatever. I do something, Poe, called lunchbox smoothie. And lunchbox smoothie is the fruit that my kids have left over at the end of the day that I've packed in their lunchbox. I put in a freezer bag and I put it in the freezer. And when that bag fills up, we make a smoothie out of it. And it's usually got grapes and berries and oranges and apples and pears. Like those are the things I usually pack for them. So that's a way we don't waste food, and then I don't have to think about a recipe
for a smoothie. I gotta try that.
Lunchbox smoothie.
Yeah,
it's the easiest smoothie recipe. We should put that. We should put that up on our blog. Or we don't have a blog. We should put that up on our Instagram page. Okay.
What else we got today?
COVID. Yeah. Well, what do you think about? I wanted to ask you. What do you think about some of those things, like doing Wim Hof breathing?
I think that's the breathing. I mean, I think anytime I feel like it's a challenge because like when you're sick, it's all you're thinking about is how bad you feel. So to be in the moment. In the moment.
It's better when it's actually for me too, probably. It's better when we talk. I can hear such a huge difference when you talk up to the mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stretching my back. Give me a second.
No worries.
Because I'm hunched over on this thing like this whole time.
Same.
But I would say
we need those arms. We need those arms that bring the mic right to where you are so you can sit up straight.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll get those.
Yes. So to answer your question, though, the Wim Hof breathing, like I got to look. I'm familiar with the guy.
Wim Hof.
Wim Hof.
Wim Hof.
Wim Hof.
HOF.
As far as the breathing goes.
Do you have 30 minutes? Not now. Someday. I'm going to send you, I'll put it in our show notes, but it's the same. The first 30 minutes of this hour-long video is where he does the breathe along. The whole hour is interesting because he goes through because he's such a interesting, fascinating guy. Like he's such a character. But anyway, early in the pandemic at UCSF where I did training, I was watching their grand rounds pretty regularly, and the Department of Psychiatry there, they had him on as a grand round speaker, which I thought was really cool. Yeah, so it's anyway. Okay, if you're interested in trying it, I feel like it's life-changing.
Really?
I
gotta try it then.
Because one of the things it's helped a lot with is my depression and anxiety, because that was one of the reasons I also continue doing it and I go back to it. Because when you do the breath hold and when you do the cold exposure, your body also starts to release like positive hormone, like chemicals, like endocannabinoids and endorphins and opioids. And there is this sort of sense of well-being and pleasure that sort of comes across your body.
Got it.
So there's, why would I go back to why I do anything. Like, it's not just I'm forcing myself to do these things. At a certain point, you experience how good they feel, and then your body wants to do them. So
Right.
So that's why I'm suggesting it. I think it is and then anxiety, because if you kind of, the cold exposure especially is like a stress on your body. And if you do it in that controlled environment where you're stressing your body and you're allowing yourself to relax in the midst of that stress, then your body adapts and you get better at that, at actually like relaxing in the face of stress. As Wim says, you become the alchemist. You change your chemistry and then you're in control. You're in control of your mind and your body. And I do believe that now to be true, like in practice when I've experienced that. Anyway, so for our listeners and also for you, Po, worth considering. I think it's a really powerful practice.
Yeah, I've done a cold bath before. I think that's very powerful. I've done that. I've done even have you ever heard of a sensory deprivation chamber?
Yes, I've done that as well.
Yeah,
did you go to one of those places?
Yeah, I've been to one.
What was that experience like for you?
Relaxing. I would say that it was very relaxing, very peaceful. You in those, it's like that feeling of like that floating sensation, and then you're completely in your thoughts. But I would say that's very beneficial when it comes to like being mindful, because I mean you really are, so long as you're in a good space. I feel like if you're not in a good mental space, it'll probably not be a good experience. When you go into a sensory deprivation chamber, it's like if you haven't been practicing any type of meditation or mindfulness, I think that sensory deprivation could be something bad if you're not used to that.
Yeah, it could be. Well, I think meditation in general could also. This is the warning I would sometimes give some of my patients about meditation. If there is something to warn, is that when you create that space, sometimes. It's similar to what you're saying, but a little different, maybe. I want to point out, like, sometimes things come out that you're not expecting. And especially if you've experienced prior trauma, then you might start to experience that or process that in a way that's really challenging or difficult. People like to talk about meditation as this calming and soothing practice, and it can be that, but it can also be a very intense emotional experience. I've experienced that many times. That's also healing. It's very healing if you go into it knowing what you might experience and using that as a way to process through what you experience. Right. But if you go into meditation unknowingly and experience that, it can be traumatic.
But other than that, I think it's those are good practices, man. Like I think
other than that, no, absolutely. I'm not saying they're not good practices. I think it's just going in knowing that
that if something comes up in the middle of your meditation, because your thoughts are racing, and then I feel like when you're in a sensory deprivation chamber and your eyes are closed and you're breathing, and it's like things are your thoughts are in your mind, so it's like if you're having prior trauma thoughts come in and you're not aware of that happening in the moment, it could be something that could make it a bad experience.
That's it. Okay, Po, I wanted to talk before we end, just to bring it back. Last week you said you were gonna try to have more conversations about your health and your health journey and kind of what you're going through right now and the support you might need with your family. Were you able to do that, or how has that gone?
Yeah, I did. Matter of fact, I think my daughter and I both went on a walk. We went on a couple walks this week, and what I found that is like we It was good. It was just she also wants to, participate in getting healthier.
Oh,
I felt like that was a huge step.
that's
Just
huge.
kind of connecting with my kids because we're having 4 kids and they're all in sports. It's like you never catch them one on one.
Mm,
Like they and usually sometimes they're off doing their own thing, but in order for what I should say is, in order for us to get more time, I have to spend more time alone with them. So that was good. My wife is still coming along. She's always
mm.
supportive. I can't say that she's not, but she's always supportive of me. And I think it's just small steps. Again, it's not going to be anything that's going to happen overnight.
That's right.
But anyways, yeah. Other than that, I mean, the exercise part is good. Um, I try to do. It's not like scheduled exercise, but like parking further away from the
Oh,
from the
good.
from the just little things that I'm trying to be mindful of, that it all adds up, and then eventually it'll become bigger.
I love
So
parking further away. I mean, that's something I do it almost to a point where it's ridiculous sometimes. I'll point in the next lot over because I know I'm going to have like 3 grocery bags to carry. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
that'll be a good
yes,
challenge when I get out of the
right,
store and I bring those 3 grocery bags up
yeah,
or I take the stairs with my grocery bags instead of taking the elevator with the cart.
yep.
Um,
That's a good idea. Just little stuff like that you don't. They're just your everyday tasks, but if you
Yeah.
can make it
How
into
can
like
you
a workout,
yeah, how can you opt like
yeah,
you're like I'm going to be going from point A to point B anyway. So
right.
how can I make that more
You know, and then
yeah,
like
beneficial?
yeah. Um, let's see, what else did I do? I mean, I think the conversation. I think what's going on is like with my wife, to get her to start talking about our health goals this year. It's just we've been overloaded with other things, and I feel like
Mm,
after we take care of those things, I think we can have that conversation. But um, I think the whole house is on board. I do believe that
yeah.
they're all on board, but it's still something that you know it's going to take time. That's all. That's all it's going to take.
Of course, it's a process. I also hear there's a lot going on right now. Not that there isn't. I'm not denying that. I will just remind you that there's always going to be a lot going on, and when this thing ends, there's going to be something
Some
else.
more stuff going on.
There's
Yeah.
more stuff going on, stuff that you don't even know about yet, and that's okay. And
Yeah.
so, think about, and you're thinking about how can I make this like more of a regular part of my life, and that's, I think, shading probably the conversations you have with your family too.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Do you have any goals for this coming week? I
Um.
can share my goals too.
Yeah. Go ahead. Share yours first.
Well, I just want to be like kind to myself because I'm just recovering from this illness, and I didn't work out at all last week, and I didn't do any of my Spartan runs last
Oh.
week, and I would love to get back to those things, but I also just want to listen to my body. It's just had this infection. It's not completely recovered. I think my mind is recovered, but like I know that I can tell. I feel, so, and that's okay. That's okay. It's not going as planned. This I think we talked about last time, and I just have to be okay with that. And I'm
Yeah.
getting back to it. It's just as much like feeling that I'm like progressing and I'm getting back to something I really enjoy. And I have to remind myself I'm not going to be away from it forever. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
okay.
Because I mean, right now you're still recovering, so you're in that recovering phase. Not long from now, you're going to be feeling really good, and this is just going to be one part of that phase
Yeah,
that you're like, you know what I'm saying? Like right
yeah,
now, I think it's just like how we were talking about COVID when it first happened, was way different mindset than
yeah,
it is today. And it's the
right,
same thing with your sickness. Like you're getting better.
right.
Go what you can. Go at your pace. That your body. Listen to
That's
your
it.
body, and then as you gradually get stronger and stronger, you're gonna next week you're probably not even be thinking about this. It's going to be a distant past. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's usually how it works.
That's
you know?
usually how
And-
it works.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then a month from now, you're going to be like, man, I remember when I got sick, and you're going to be running it all.
All right, yeah,
on all
I got
cylinders.
COVID last month. I don't even remember.
Right.
No. That to me anyway is kind of COVID for me. Getting the infection has been a little anticlimactic for how much buildup there was in my head and everything in my life and my work, and it was to get it now and then just be like, okay, I'm getting a little better every day. Like that kind of sucked, and I'm getting better is good. That's a good thing, and it's also
It's a very good thing.
It's an amazing thing. Yeah, amazing thing. I feel very fortunate, like I said, in the time I got it and how I've been able to get better. But I also feel like it's anticlimactic.
Right. I mean, considering where it was, 2-3 years ago, this is a good conversation. Like, oh, it's just, it's not that bad.
Okay.
And,
well, what's your goal? What's a goal of yours for
I think a goal of mine is to meditate. I think after this conversation, like just, when you were talking about your wife and how she, was able to think about how to view certain things, versus like your mindset about it. I think that's something that I I've not, I guess, consistent. Like I think I'm only meditating when I have time or when it's convenient, I'm not always in the frame of mind of being in that state. So just you sharing about how your wife did it, I think that's something that's, I got to get back to that as well.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then continuing, trying to do some type of movement, every day. That's another one too.
That's some type of movement every day. Yeah, that's the way to look at it. I tried to do some type of movement 3 days last week, or well, no,
You're sick, so
no, I was sick, but even then, I was like, yeah, my movement was like, I'll just get up. On one of the days, I think it was Wednesday, before I was feeling really bad, I was like, I'll just get up and do a little bit of stretching because it was sunny outside in the backyard. I was like, I'll just do a little bit of stretching on the lawn in the backyard for a few minutes. And it was nice. And then I just ended up laying down. And that felt really good. I felt the sun on my face.
Yeah.
Versus just staying in bed. I mean,
or staying in the house.
In the house. One would have required, honestly, going outside and lying down and doing a little bit of stretching didn't require much effort. The most effort it required was actually getting up and doing it, as opposed to it would have been easy to just stay in bed on my phone.
Right.
Let's be honest.
Right.
Like when I'm sick, I can just scroll and I don't even feel bad about it. I'm like, I'm sick. I can't do anything. And it kind of numbs. You talk about like either letting go into the experience or completely numbing the experience with your device, which is kind of what, the alternative you could do. But then after doing that for a long period, like I scroll my phone or look at videos or whatever, at the end of it, I'm like, you ever connect with how you feel after that? I sort of don't feel good. I feel like, because it depends on how much time has gone by, but if it's a really significant, when I'm sick, I was like, I don't have anything else to do, but even still, I was like, but if it's like a weeknight and I know I could have been sleeping and I look at the clock, like I almost feel regretful. I'm like, I don't know, maybe you don't feel that way?
No, I feel like I could be doing something else more productive.
Yeah.
That's one thing that's common for me. But what's interesting is like I don't have my phone on me for 3 days straight. I only have it when I get off. And so I don't have that connection. But even now when I'm on it, I still feel like, man, I could be, doing something else, going for a walk.
I could be doing something else.
Bike. I could be doing something that's more productive for me versus scrolling. Like, see, the thing that I'm addicted to is information. Like I love like listening to podcasts or watching YouTube videos about it doesn't matter what it is. Like it could be like, how to change the knob on the door. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that. Like that's what I like about the phone. It's like, oh, I'm going to look that up. Like we were talking about the Iceman, like I've seen him before, but now it's like, okay, when I have some time, I'm going to look him up.
Yeah. I mean, that is to say that the technology is a very useful tool for learning information and looking things up. The question is, are you using it as a tool? Like, is that practical for you? Are you learning a lot of things that you're then are bettering your life or improving your productivity, or is it a form of entertainment?
I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. I think sometimes it's entertainment. Like I love watching about, football or, stuff like that.
It's both.
It is a little bit of everything. I can't say. Now, what you're saying is if you had a pie chart, how much of it? Like, are you
how much of it is like, that's it.
I get it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Not that we shouldn't entertain ourselves either, but we should be honest about why we're using it and how much we're using it. And the stats from last week, I won't show anyone, are probably terrible on my phone. It tells you the usage. Like I think there were, Wednesday, Thursday, when I wasn't, I was working actually, but not a lot, and just trying, and I work virtually. So when I wasn't working, I was just basically in bed. And
I think when and this is something that I'm just understanding, like it's coming to me now. It's like if none of my kids are at sporting events and they don't have anything going on and we're at home and everybody's on some type of social media, some type of screen, then that's a problem for me, because it could be something that we could be doing together, whether that's going out and playing some basketball, even though but like, or going for a walk.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is a good place to stop, place to end our conversation for this week. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening, and
we will tune in next time.
We'll tune in next time to the Health Feast. Okay. Bye, Po.
All right. We'll see you.